Yeah, we're making a video of these paintings that I did out on the Skagit River from 1975 till 2021. Decided it's time to document them, and we're doing a film about my life on the river and these paintings. I joined the Air Force because I was going to get drafted in 1967. It just, the way it was back then, you got out of high school, you went to Vietnam. I was a weapons mechanic is what they called me, which meant I loaded weapons on F-4 fighter jets. This is a 500-pound bomb I'm sitting on. Anyway, it was strange. This is right out the fence of the Air Force Base. And, you know, they got concertina wire, barbed wire. And that's part of the village of the city of Udor in Thailand. It is a beautiful country and nice people. The first day I got in Thailand, I was in Bangkok. And I decided when I went to Thailand, I wanted to smoke some pot. I'd heard about it and other people had smoked it, but I never ran across it. So when I first got there, I was downtown in Bangkok, and I went out on the streets to look around, and this guy came up to me and he said, "Oh, you want a woman?" And I said, "No, but I'd like to smoke some pot." So that's what I did. And it pretty much changed my life from then on. Then I moved to Japan. I had a girlfriend too, and she was a Japanese hippie, an artist. So it was great, I had a great time, you know. Partway through my time in Japan, I went on leave to California. Because I'd heard about, you know, the hippies and Haight-Ashbury and all that stuff, and I wanted to see what it was like. So I went to Haight-Ashbury and took some LSD. Then I went back to Japan. I'd be doing my job loading bombs, but they didn't have much in Japan. But they had nuclear bombs in Korea, and that's what I did there. I went back to my first sergeant and told them I wanted to be a conscious objector, so they stopped my job immediately and gave me a job driving a little van and picking up people from job sites. And so that was cool, you know, I didn't have to go to Korea and do that shit. Anyway, this picture of me is on acid, you know, just laying there listening to music, tripping. Anyway, I did that for kind of the rest of the time I was in Japan. They didn't like me, you know, because first thing, they didn't know what to do with a conscious objector. Nobody had ever done it before. And I got busted just before I left because I decided to take my time off for, you know, I just didn't show up for work. So I'd, you know, go hang out and do stuff. And they were wondering where I was at because I wasn't at work. So they gave me Article 32, I think they called it, and took one of my stripes away, my rank, which didn't bother me any. And then I got out. I got on the plane and flew to California and processed out. So when I got out of the Air Force in California, I went to San Diego for a while and hung out there and hitchhiked around some. And then I ended up in Seattle. I was living on Capitol Hill, and there was this experimental college at the University of Washington. And I think Tom Robbins was even involved in starting that, but it was yoga classes, Tibetan Buddhism, palmistry, astrology, all kinds of stuff. So I was hanging out in Seattle, so I started going to a few of those classes, and Seattle was like, it was a happening place. And the main scene was, there was this big tavern scene where it was kind of almost like, I can imagine what Paris was like in the old days, with artists meeting and drinking absinthe and cafes and communicating with each other, and it's like a scene. But in Seattle, it was like the taverns. It was a tavern scene with beer and sometimes music. When I ended up, I was called the Deluxe Tavern. It was on Capitol Hill, and I ended up washing dishes there, and it's like became friends with everybody, and I'd stay till 2 in the morning, and then we'd go out and have breakfast somewhere and talk, and communicate, and really good friendships. This is 2 of the guys I worked with. The guy on the right is Kip O'Gorman. He was a wonderful man. Everybody loved Kip. He was great. And the other guy is my friend Clyde. I knew Clyde before. Deluxe was a great place. And the Cornish Art Institute was right down the street. And a lot of stuff was happening around there. So at the Deluxe, I made a lot of friends. This is John Schaefer. He ended up being my best buddy. He was at the Deluxe sometimes. He traveled around a lot, but he was an artist. I met a lot of art. That's where I became interested in art, because artists hung out at the Deluxe. Even people from LaConner and Skagit Valley, where I ended up living on the river. He was a great painter, and he showed paintings a lot of different places, and he introduced me to a lot of other artists, Leo Canny, and that's how I ended up at the river. I'd met some people that lived up in the Skagit Valley at the Deluxe. I thought I'd move out to the river because there were some artists living on the North Fork of the Skagit River, Charlie Kraft and some other people. And it was kind of a hippie artist commune. So I decided, well, that's the life for me. I want to move out of the city, and I want to live up at Fishtown. So I moved up to LaConner, got a room in the Nordic Hotel, and then we heard about the river, so John and I moved out to these old cabins on the river, these abandoned cabins. That started that whole 45 years of my life. These are pictures of when I first moved out to the river, what the place looked like in 1975. Well, John and I lived out at the river and drank a lot of wine and painted a lot, and then I met Ani. Ani moved in, and she did a lot of gardening, and anyway, I built this studio, and her parents came up and helped me build it some, and I tore down another old cabin in another part of the river and used the lumber to build the studio. The only thing I had to buy was some roll-on roofing for the top. The rest, other than nails, I used salvaged wood, then hauled it all out there and put it together. And then I built this hot tub. I got this big cedar log, it's on another part of the river, and had a big root on the end, and I cut it off. It was actually a pulley and block and tackle from an old sailboat or something. Anyway, we rolled it up on the bank. There used to be fish in the river, and that's what I caught. I used to catch a lot of cutthroats, a lot of dollies, but that's history. You don't even see a fish in the river anymore. This was one of the little garden beds that Annie had. But anyway, she had a lot of gardens. She lived there with me for 7 years. Anyway, that was inside the cabin. Of course, no electricity, so kerosene lanterns. The studio was upriver a little bit. And those windows, I got them first before I built the cabin. A friend of mine gave them to me. He said they got them from a mental institution in eastern Washington. You can see they're all steel framed. They're like prison windows almost, made out of steel. And that's the studio with my art supplies in it. While I was out at the river, I was always painting. And Clough and the Skagit Valley itself, at that time, there was a lot going on. It was the 70s and early 80s, and there was what they call the Magic Skagit Festival, people protesting the nuclear power plants. There was all kinds of things going on there, music, and there was also an art scene with art shows. That art's alive. They still have that in Clough every fall. This is a card I made for a gallery in Edison called the Edison Eye. It was a really cool gallery. The guy who owned it was a professional fisherman. Well, maybe more than once a year, he'd have a theme show, and he was a poet too, so he'd get these different titles for shows, and you were supposed to do some painting related to his title. These shows were at Von Newell's barn and John Simon's barn. They're called the barn shows. And every year we had a show. I think they started in the 80s. They went for maybe 20 years, but different artists from around the Skagit Valley. And that's me at the cabin. That's what it looked like at one point. And you can see the hot tub. All this time, ever since I got back from Japan. When I was in Japan, I started taking LSD quite a bit. And when I was out the river, I started taking LSD when I painted. And I'd do the background while I was on LSD. And then later on I would paint the geometric form. I painted quite a few paintings that way. One fall, I was in Clough at a friend of mine's house, and in his yard there was a couple bushes, and under the bushes I saw all these mushrooms. So I looked them up in my mushroom book, and they're cyanescens, which are psychedelic mushrooms. So I picked them and then I dried them. Like every 3 weeks I would eat some mushrooms and tape off a section of my panel and make a painting while I was still on the mushrooms. And then later I would go through and after it dried and finish it and do some other stuff to it. These next paintings are what I call drip paintings because I dripped gesso. This one is black gesso with a small palette knife and made those squiggly patterns. Early on when I started painting, I got these two books. One is The Power of Limits, and it's kind of a geometric theory that works for all kinds of things. The book influenced some of my paintings, and I used this pattern in some of my paintings. It's kind of an American Indian pattern. It's in the golden proportion now. This is the other book I used a lot, and these are Islamic patterns and geometric patterns mostly based on the circle, square, triangle, and hexagon. You can create many patterns with this. And all the patterns are done just with a compass, a straight edge and a compass, no measuring. They have screws on the points. I call them the point and line series because you start out with one point, to make a geometric pattern, and then you make a line from that, and another point, and then you create your patterns. I used to go to Mexico once a year, usually in February, and I'd travel around, go to different cities, different places, beaches, whatever. And I was in Guanajuato, and there's a museum there, and it's in an old granary where part of the revolution was fought there. One of the sections had these little stamps, most of them ceramic. When I got back, I did this series of paintings of the graphics. I call this series my shadow paintings because basically I was painting the shadow of an object, and I did some of them. I put my little panel on the wall, and then I'd have my kerosene lanterns sitting in front of it, and I'd have a bottle sitting in front of the panel, and it would project. The shadow would be, and then I'd trace the shadow pattern, and then I'd go ahead and paint the picture. This is kind of a combination of shadow and a drip painting. And the shadow is tricycle handlebars and two duck head decoys on the handle of the handlebars. Another shadow painting while I was camping, shadow panel on the ground and the shadow projecting on it. As the sun moved, you know, the pattern would change. I had to be fast, you know, sketching quickly, just the rough shape. And this was a self-portrait, one of Dana Rush's shows at the Edison Eye, one of his shows where he just kind of challenged the artist to do something. It's supposed to be a self-portrait. Just how I get the incised parts out, and then I would sand it and then start painting it and sand it, maybe some more, rub paint off and put paint on until I got a painting. This was the last painting I did out of the river. Painting of this giant grass, but it's like 8 foot tall. And I went out and it's the bluest sky I've ever seen. So I went out with my camera and I stood at the bottom of these reeds and tried to get the perspective of me looking up at the top. And I call it above, below, and beyond. This is a picture of the cabin I lived on in the Skagit River for 45 years. And this is the flood of 2022. It's what forced me to move out of the river. And this is the flood. Huge logs you can kind of see out there floating by. Some of them were like locomotives, they were so big. I couldn't go out, I had to stay in the cabin because it was impossible. The wind was blowing, someone said 80 miles an hour. It was really windy and dangerous. I was stuck in the cabin for about 5 hours when the tide came in, started coming in the cabin. There's been floods over the years. The thing about this one, it was the river was flooding, and then we had super high tides and low pressure, and it pushed the whole bay up into the yard. few weeks after the flood, the river started freezing over, and for a while it was frozen all the way across. And so then I was kind of stuck inside the cabin again, and I couldn't get out in the boat and go anywhere because it was all iced up. The ice started breaking up. It started flowing out, and it broke my dock. The dock ended up way down the river a ways. And that's when I finally decided, well, you gotta move. Anyway, this was sunset just before I moved out. It was right around the solstice, and the swans showed up on the river. Usually the swans aren't on the river. Really a spectacular sunset, seeing it on the water like that. That was my last solstice at the river.